The cemetery gates closed at 11:57 p.m. Not at exactly midnight as protocol dictates, the very same protocol I helped write, but 3 minutes earlier, with a clang of iron against iron that cut through the air as if someone had hammered a nail into the night. I was inside, alone. The cars had already left, the candles flickered dead in the wind, and the last breath of conversation had flowed through the alleys like water meeting asphalt. I usually stay after. There are arrangements I prefer to straighten out, notes I write better with the world in silence, promises to those who are leaving that I verbalize when no one needs to see. But that night, when the latch fell, it wasn't protocol. It was a warning. I always say that a cemetery isn't a place for fright. It's a place for commitment, to the earth, to the names, to the ones who remember. But there are times when the ground pushes one way, the sky another, and they leave us in a narrow corridor where the air weighs 2 extra kilos per lung. The wind stopped pushing the tops of the cypress trees. The crickets, who seemed to have a contract to sing forever, fell silent. And the iron of the gates, 2 tall sheets, rust-colored and domesticated, vibrated for a second after they closed, as if breathing. I thought about calling, of course. I reached for my jacket pocket. No signal. Not that I expected it, there in that part of the land where the hills of tombs rise like frozen waves, but the confirmation left my mouth in the desert. I learned to breathe through my nose, consciously, when the night decides to narrow the margins. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The habit brings me back to my body, and the remembered body is the first thing that dawn tries to take. I shouldn't have been there alone, they would say. Not at that hour, with the low fog beginning to trim the feet of the crosses, with the pathway lights flickering in alternating series of 5 lamps at a time, like a contagious electrical illness. But Mr. Walter's family, 73 years old, retired railway worker, wool coat even in September, asked me for one last minute. I gave it. I waited for the daughter to empty her eyes without embarrassing them, helped the wife carefully lift the memory that weighs more than the body itself, and stored what they needed stored. Then, as always, I returned to perform a gesture almost no one sees, lightly tapping twice on the wood to thank the cooperation of those who can no longer respond. It was on the second tap that I heard, in the distance, the slow dragging of chains, before the clang. A warning I understood too late. A cemetery at night has its grammar. The wind assumes the voice of the trees, and it's not poetry, it's the science of controlled fright. The earth adjusts under footsteps, the gravel repeats our rhythm mistakes. Those chains, however, didn't obey the grass or the habit. It was iron calling iron. And before I crossed the alley of worn marble and artificial roses soaked in dew, the gate had shut itself off. Did I run? No. I learned not to run where the ground is made of memories. I quickened my pace just enough to hear my heel complain. I reached the gate still with the echo of the closure, jumping between the columns. I stood facing the intertwined iron and the ornamental tips that guard more than an entrance. They guard distance. I pushed lightly. It didn't give. The latch, external, passed through the frame with the indifference of objects that have fulfilled their vocation. I spoke the name of the caretaker. No answer. The old intercom near the office creaked, as if it had already said all it had to say. I tapped my hand twice. The soul of the night returned the sound with half a dose of irony. I stayed. Of all the places to spend a piece of the night, this wasn't the worst. But there was something in the position of the tombs, and don't ask me how one measures this, that gave me the impression that that night the city was sleeping outside and the world was paying attention from the inside. When a door closes between you and the rest, there are 2 possible movements. Shout through the door or converse with the room. I chose to converse with the room. The silence it returned wasn't hostile. It was dense, yes, with the gravity of names that have learned to stay. But it didn't want to swallow me. It wanted me to stay. Our mistake sometimes is thinking that all imprisonment is a threat. Some prisons are invitations. I said in a low voice, as I do when I don't need to convince anyone, I am here. The night listened, and from the far end of the main hallway, where the sculpted angels had lost fingers over the decades and still kept their blessing, came the first sound that wasn't mine. 3 spaced taps, stone against stone, and a long shiver that met my back with the efficiency of a professional. I'm not one to see ghosts, I'm one to hear waits, and the waits had awakened. The cemetery where I work, I really work, I don't just pass through, was designed with an old idea of order. Straight alleys, blocks like neighborhoods, names grouped by time and financial chance, a chapel on high, like an eye that watches over the city of those who've already left. By day, this order serves us. It creates a map for the lost, a path for those who need to return always to the same place. At night, the order turns into something else, a score I don't fully decipher, but I can follow through the notes. The low fog began to rise, cutting the first steps of the chapel and licking the base of the larger mausoleums. The flashlight I bring for night visits, discreet warm light so as not to turn marble into a set, drew a gentle cone over the scratched gravel of 1,000 footsteps. I stayed for a while looking at the gate, as if trying to telepathically send my will. No sign of return. The caretaker could be at the other end, checking the secondary gate. He could have gone, as I've seen, to fetch hot coffee in the early morning, and would be back in 10 minutes. In any random choice, I would need to adapt. The phone lost a bar. With every deeper step into the grounds, the possibility of communicating reduced itself to no, with the politeness of electronics that don't care about human urgencies. I put the device back in my pocket, behind the old handkerchief I carry by habit. A clean cloth between what I feel and the hand that needs to act. I walked the central line, the one that cuts through the oldest field, with low tombs and time-tilted plaques. Tombs of people no one has visited for decades, because the ones who visited them climbed the alley in their turn, and didn't leave a delegate. The wind returned, discreet, giving voice to the trees outside, the branches scraping the wall with the insistence of those who haven't learned to ask for permission. And it was in this music that the smaller sounds began to appear. A periodic drip of an invisible leak, a chain vibrating twice before tiring, a crack of stone warming under the dew. Secondary notes, the whole creates a sea. At the first block on the right, Mr. Walter, to whom I owe my thanks, rested beneath a lid too polished for the railway worker's life that carried rust on its sleeves. On the tombstone, someone had left an old whistle, the kind a machinist would use tape to prevent it from flying away. I knew who. The grandson, 8 years old, who yesterday whistled in it silently, respectfully to say goodbye. I like those gestures. They are small, they don't ask for an audience, but they adjust the axis of the world. I passed by him, 2 light taps with my fingers on the wood, my standard thank you. It was then that to the left, in the cypress alley, I got what I didn't ask for, a whisper of metal. Not of chains now, but of a hinge, followed by the unmistakable sound of a lid, not banging but adjusting, as if someone with a hand lowered the cover of a niche without sealing it. I set the light on the ground, took another step, conscious that a stumble costs dearly where memories are fragile. You learn to differentiate what time does from what people do. Time doesn't decide rhythm, it insists. People have their pace, their way of moving weight. There was the pace of people. I stopped in front of the Rocha family mausoleum, who no longer live in the neighborhood, but left the house of the dead furnished. Wrought iron door, glass protected by mesh, 2 lanterns on the sides that had given up lighting with the century. I lightly touched the iron. The cold climbed my arm like water. No voice other than the 3 cracks from before echoed. The street above, darkness. It was a brief dragging, just a few steps, that pushed me back to the center. There is no creature in the cemetery night that steps like a human. Cat, light steps in 4 uneven beats. A possum, dry noise, a bit wobbly. People, the weight first falls on the heel, the gravel accepts and complains. I heard the heel, and for the first time that night, my whole body asked me to say my name in a low voice, as if introducing myself to not seem intrusive. I said it. The cemetery heard me. A breeze lifted the sweet smell of a flower taken out of the water too long ago. From the far end of the central line, where you can see in the background, the smaller gate locked for security, came 2 events together. A flash of headlights turning the corner outside, and the small but delightful sound of a key knocking against another. The caretaker? Maybe. The headlights passed, the wall returned a white rectangle of light and moved on. The keys didn't insist. The gate didn't move. That's when I realized I could spend the entire night there and nothing bad would happen to me. This certainty is not naivety. It's the same certainty that follows me when I cross, with my family, the aisle of the main chapel at 3 in the afternoon in November. It's not about courage, it's about recognizing where the night is the master. And in that properly fenced square of the sleeping city, the night had kindly invited me in. The question wasn't, how do I get out? It was, what is left to do while I stay? The answer came in the form of an old prayer I didn't remember knowing by heart. I didn't speak with my mouth. I thought it, as one thinks of instructions a father gave in the hallway of the house one day. If you stay, keep company. If you hear, respond with respect. If called, don't run, walk. The cemetery, satisfied, made the resting bench by the little chapel of candles creak as if pulling a chair. I sat down, and, sitting, I began to record what the night wanted to tell me. There is a shy boundary that separates useful fear from theatrical fear. The useful connects the senses, sharpens the ear, devours distractions. The theatrical rises to the eyes, creates specters from honest shadows, and turns a sigh into a creature. I train the first and prune the second, since I began to carry names in my pocket. While the bench beneath me agreed with my weight, the useful took over the room. And the signs began to align with the politeness of those who don't want to scare the guest. First came the step that wasn't mine. 1. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. Not firm enough to betray a flight, nor heavy enough to ask for help. Steps of someone who knows the house and forgot how to walk because they no longer need knees. The flashlight swept the central aisle, nothing but dewdrops shining like bitten nails from stars. I turned off the light and let the eye do its centuries-old job, learn to see with less. The sound returned to the left. 2 rows ahead, the granite lid of a low tomb had grains of sand recently disturbed. Dew doesn't settle like that for nothing. Someone had moved there minutes before. I'm not saying open, I'm saying run a hand over the plaque, like someone checking a name in a catalogue. I leaned in, knees bending on gravel that doesn't forgive a suit. Benedita Rocha, 1924-1999. The plaque read with dignity. Whoever had passed by there cleaned the name with their sleeve. I ran my fingers over the R. I felt warmth. The world returns heat when you touch with intention. Another creak of iron. This time, from the side gate, the one that leads to the dead-end street where the gardening truck parks on Tuesdays. The sound of a chain swinging once, followed by a silence that wanted to turn back into sound, but gave up. A game. Someone was testing my axis. Stay. On the small hill with 3 steps that lead to the block of the newest tombs, a votive candle flickered as if someone had just passed by. These are battery candles, the kind that learn bad habits from the wind and mimic a flame with minimal awareness. But the air was still, the cypress above didn't dance, the plastic saints on the tombs didn't fly. Only the candle was entertained. Along with it, for the first time, a voice. No, not a name. The sound we make to call a cat without giving a name, a short kiss against the lips, a soft psew of affection. I leaned in, alone, answering with the same sound I used to calm a child in the chapel. Ta. Ridiculous and effective. The bench behind me responded with a creak of wood that rested. I assumed the night didn't want me walking too much. I sat again, feet parallel, hands on my thighs, jacket open so it wouldn't talk to the sweat that visits when tension decides to be respectful. The phone, stubborn, vibrated with a couple of hopes in my pocket, trying to grab a signal and letting it go like a fish. I left it there. There is no phrase I should say to the world now that is better than the one I can say to those who are here. I'm not leaving until they let me go. Maybe that's what organized the orchestra, because suddenly there were no more isolated sounds. There was cemetery music, a distant engine that doesn't want to arrive, the dry straw of a wreath scraping stone, a step that doesn't complete, an iron that decides to just exist, and above, among the leaves that didn't move, a small object crossing the space and falling 2 inches from my shoe. I looked, a hair clasp. the kind used to pin a flower to a vale, with an artificial daisy still attached, half the crooked stem. It didn't come from the sky. It came from a lapel that had let go out of envy of gravity. I picked it up, almost weightless, stubborn memories shine. I put it in my pocket with the handkerchief, a collection from the night. "Director," someone said without a mouth. I didn't look around. There are ways of hearing you learn on the job. They're not ears, they're bones. Director. And along with it, something I've never gotten used to, though it doesn't frighten me, a desire to order, not to command. To put each thing back where it belongs, the night hired me to be myself on its shift. I stood up slowly, with the solemn comedy of someone apologizing for every creak of a knee. I walked to the new field, where the photographs still have too many colors and the names haven't learned to speak softly with time. The first lid on the right, a fallen rose over the date, a plastic card pinned under the edge with tape, half fallen out. I put it back, aligning it with a gesture my hand knows by heart. The wind approved with nothing, and it was in this alignment that from the big gate, from behind, from outside, a thread of orange light licked the iron, spinning little sparkles in the rust spots. Headlights. Park. Please. I took 3 steps to the gate and stopped. Inside here, the night still had messages. There's no point in rushing to the iron if the one who opens it hasn't yet reached the other side. Director. Again, now with the satirical sweetness of someone who would like to call me by my baptismal name. I replied with the name of the first one I always remember when I step on this land. I said softly, "Jose, thank you for the company." The night returned a satisfied creak, and in the street the efficient sound of a key ring decided. When the key ring sounded with determination, I understood 2 things at once. The first, practical, was that the caretaker had finally arrived. The second, deeper, was that the night still wanted to give the last message before returning me to the other side. I stopped in the axis of the main alley, the one that points directly to the gate, and saw through the iron the lantern of the caretaker's jacket swinging in 3 beats. The man walked as if he carried sleep in his pockets. I raised a hand. "Here," I said with half my voice. He nodded as if we were sharing an old secret. It was then, for the first time, that I noticed something I had left behind earlier. The whistle of Mr. Walter's grandson, pinned with tape to the edge of the tombstone, no longer shone under the lantern light. I went over there, 10 meters, 15. It wasn't there. Did someone take it? Did the playful afternoon wind set it free in the brush? Maybe. A whistle, after all, is a trophy for someone who hasn't yet learned the value of what isn't theirs. But the cemetery, with its living room manners, grew within my ear and whispered what I had already learned to recognize. "Look carefully." I knelt, the lamp low, light angled. If there's one thing the night taught me, it was to illuminate horizontally. When shadows rise, they reveal themselves. There, 3 centimeters under a layer of fine gravel and silk petals, the shadow of a flared tube outlined the confession. I moved it with my fingers, slowly. The whistle appeared, still with the end of the tape stuck to it, dirty with damp dust. I took it, and by a reflex I can't explain to the skeptic, I whistled without sound, just air, with respect, and returned it to its place. The tape embraced the stone again with a docility that objects sometimes reserve for those who speak to them by name. "Director," 3rd time, with the tenderness of mockery, and with it, a request. "Take it." Didn't ask what. If she did, not with words. My hand went to my pocket where the hair clasp screamed its presence with the aggression of small things. I took it out. I went to the row of low tombstones, plastic photographs in the corners, and for a moment I imagined the head to which that clasp had pinned a flower on a morning of another June. The plaque said, "Helena, 1932-2010, Mother." No surname was needed for me to understand the way that family names its affections. I placed the clasp beside the flowers, without artistry, just firmly, like someone returning the house key to the living room table. The night lowered by an inch. It's a measure that can't be described, only felt. The resting bench by the little chapel, the same one that invited me, creaked a low sound of satisfaction. The gate now creaked with the anticipation of the right key. The caretaker, Mr. Antunes, eyes of someone who sleeps better by day, had finally reached the place where I could see his face. "Sorry, Director. They closed from the street. I was in the back checking the dog's business." I nodded. There at that boundary of ornamental iron, I was less of a director and more of a respectful tenant. "Open slowly?" I asked. He smiled crookedly. "You and your slow." "Yes, slow is the only law that upholds a night like this. Mechanisms that obey very fast steps ruin things." He fitted the key, the fourth on the ring, the one without a label because everyone here knows it by touch, and turned it. The click of the latch was music. The chains vibrated their two familiar notes. And the gate denied the natural impulse to swing wide. It opened by 10 degrees, as if allowing the exit with the elegance of one who knows the invitation is still in progress. Before crossing, I said, "Give me a minute." He looked at me as if he knew my lapses. I took 3 steps back, pulled the handkerchief from my pocket, wiped 2 lids with a handprint, straightened a little saint that had slipped, and tapped softly on 3 wooden sides, always with the same phrase I don't say with my mouth. "Thank you for making me stay. If it was imagination, I care less than I should." But as I turned my body towards the street, someone, a woman with a voice full of hallway, said my baptismal name. It's been a while since I've heard it like that. I saw a taller shadow between cypress trees, the head as if pondering the way. And for a second that was enough. I was certain the cemetery hadn't trapped me. It had asked me to tidy the room before leaving. "When you want to come back," the shadow seemed to say without saying, "come through the door, not the gate." I crossed, the iron kissed iron behind me with the discreet kiss of those who have been married for decades. Mr. Antunes nodded toward the office. "Coffee?" I accepted. "Just a sip," I said. The rest deserved sugar. The climax in these tales, people expect it to be the spectre in the corridor's curve or the hand holding the jacket. I rarely deliver that. The climax resides where 2 wills recognize each other, the one who stays and the one who is asked to stay. In the modest office of the caretaker, a table, 2 chairs, a radio that hasn't learned the right song since 1998. The electric kettle lit up its red eye and entrusted the water to a tired coil. Mr. Antunes sat down, untied a story without asking my permission, and unknowingly delivered the last screw the night needed to tighten. "I close at 11:57 because the clock across the street is 3 minutes fast. If I wait until they're 12, it'll be midnight and 2 minutes on mine. Then people complain that I close too late. If I close earlier, they complain that I close too early. So I chose to close, and that's it." "Were you stuck?" "Yes." "Fa, you should know that this gate doesn't trap anyone who learns the way. But have you learned the way?" I smiled with the fatigue of the respectful. "I've learned the way that matters. Stay until the house says, go." He stirred the sugar, as if signing a document. "You've got a good ear for things that don't make it on the radio." It's a compliment I keep nicely in an inside pocket. "Every now and then," he continued, "there's something that doesn't let us leave, right? Mine is Mrs. Dora from Block 4. Every time I pass by, just glancing when there's wind, there's absolution for anyone who needs it. Who do you have?" I thought of the whistle of Mr. Walter's grandson, the hair clasp. Jose, whom I always call when I feel awkward. Walter, who still smells like track grease. "I have mine," I replied, serving coffee with the attention that a church gives to water. We had 3 sips in silence. The kettle switched off with a click, the only certainty of the early mornings. The radio, in a fit of whimsy, decided to choose static with a voice. Antunes went to it, turned the dial from the times when dials were authority, and we let a tremor of white noise fill the office. "This helps me hear what I need," he said. I nodded. Static, like fog, reveals what hurries us. The dawn, polished, began to close the sources. The cricket returned to sign its presence. A dog barked 2 streets up, with the insistence of those unsure if they're barking at the wind or at the memory of a bark. The cemetery wall returned a rectangle of light in the distance, a taxi passing lazily, and, for a moment as precise as a clap, I heard the whistle. Not with the mouth, with a whistle. 3 small notes, almost like a child trying to learn a rhythm. We looked at each other with the servitude of those who believe in what isn't worth arguing. The grandson came. No. Oh, then it was a message, said Antunes, with the invisible philosophy of those who have keys. Message accepted, the final gesture remained. Leave slowly, pass through the gate as one would change rooms, not as one escapes, and thank with the politeness that was required of me. We left, he in front with the jingling keys, I behind with my hands out of my pockets so the body wouldn't interpret it as flight. The iron yielded on both sides without dramatization. Lock from the outside, I asked. Let me hear the tongue. He obeyed and the iron sang softly. Before the corner I turned. The cemetery breathed like one who sleeps without remorse. A drip of light here and there, a cypress saying goodnight to the shadow of the other. An empty street educating the dawn to end. My phone in my pocket, decided to find all the signal bars as if it had nothing to do with what I'd lived. I blinked at it, as if saying, now, yes. On the way to the car, my head tried to steal from me with the temptation of an epic summary. I didn't give in. The correct summary was small. The gates closed before the time so I could learn, once again, that I don't leave a house until the house has finished taking care of its own. I stayed, I listened, I returned. The rest is projection. I walked the block in silence, my hand on the imaginary whistle of the grandson, which echoed in my pocket like a plastic ghost. At the intersection, the city returned me to the status of those who have a house key and bath time. Antunes stayed, with his kettle and static, governing the periphery of the invisible with the authority that only those who open and close doors possess. The ending I offer to those who listen isn't an explosion, it's an invitation. That morning, which was still night, already in the car, I rested my forehead on the steering wheel for 3 full breaths. Not from exhaustion, from hygiene. The head, when it returns from the inside, needs to relearn how to obey the outside. I turned on the low beam, let the gear slip with courtesy, and crossed the street as if asking for permission. The cemetery, in the rearview mirror, turned into an illustration from an old book, iron outlining shadows, and a faint impression that the white smoke eroding the tombstone bases had, for a second, drawn the figure of someone sitting on the chapel bench, hands in lap, approving dinner. Later in the office, I wrote 3 lines in my notebook, not the one for official reports, the other one, which I inherited from my father with missing pages and advice that only makes sense at dawn. Gates closed at 11:57. Staying is a verb that opens more doors than a key. Returning is the only honest way to leave. And a 4th point, which I didn't write, but preferred to speak to the air. When they call me again, I'll go, but it should be through the door, not through haste. The phone in the following days rang with common messages, flowers that didn't arrive. The 7 o'clock mass confirmed, a complaint about the noise of the shovel on Saturday, the city and its boulders. Among them, Mr. Walter's daughter. Director, my boy said that when he grows up he wants to work with you to learn how to put whistles in the right place. I laughed inside with the delicacy of someone holding a full glass while walking. Tell him that the first lesson is to learn to return things without asking for applause. And since then, every time I pass by the big gate near midnight, when the iron shivers the memory of the last closing before time, I say, without voice, with that economy of words that the night likes, if you're going to lock me in, let it be to organize, not to punish. At night, which doesn't promise, sometimes fulfills. Other times it just listens, and listening in times of scarcity is already a gesture. Did all this happen? What happened is what I could testify to without ruining it with anxiety. The rest, I leave for those who need a ghost to sleep. I, at this point, sleep with key and notebook. If they lock me in again, I know I have work. And work here is always the same. Listen to the weights, return what belongs to whom. Don't run, and at the right time, accept the music of the tongue of the latch when the house decides I can leave. Now a question that matters less to the mystery and more to the daily courage. If the gates closed behind you at 11:57 and the night asked you to stay, not with a shout but with an invitation, would you stay? Or would you spend the next hour teaching the iron to obey? If you're still here with me, comment the keyword invitation and say, for you, is staying imprisonment or care? If you want more stories like this, write next in the comments and suggest a theme. I read everything in silence.